Now, one of my favorite lines from a movie comes from the film The Usual Suspects, though yes, it actually goes back further than that. But it is in that film when one of the characters, I won't go too much into details in case you've never seen it, but one of them says that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist, which I basically interpret to mean that evil has the easiest time thriving in places you least expect it, or from people you'd never expect it from. And as you can maybe guess, one of the reasons why I like that line so much is because it actually kind of sums up the Star Wars prequel trilogy quite well, where the Jedi had become so complacent that they not only missed the return of the dark side, but also didn't know or never suspected until much too late that the devil was hiding right under their nose the whole time, keeping in mind that this is what George Lucas said of Palpatine in those films.
Palpatine represents the devil. He represents the pure evil, the Dark Lord of the Sith, who is purely out to get more power and his greed.
I'm appointing you to be my...
In other words, as I know I've been talking about quite a bit lately, but the whole point of the prequels is to simply say that good must always remain vigilant, even when there's been no real major sign of evil in 1,000 years, which is what that line from Ki-Adi-Mundi actually is supposed to mean. That it's when you let your guard down that evil can and will sneak back in and win, and even potentially be welcomed back with thunderous applause because people are convinced that evil is actually good, or that the good guys are or were actually the bad guys all along. And apparently Palpatine did such a good job in those films that he not only fooled people in the Star Wars galaxy to turn on the Jedi, but he also fooled people here in the real world. Even some who are making Star Wars today seem to have been confused by those films, and think that evil maybe isn't all that bad, that someone who is supposed to represent the literal devil, or is on the side of pure evil, the Sith, maybe they had some good points, or that what he said about the Jedi maybe wasn't all that wrong. Because in a recent interview with Collider, the showrunner of The Acolyte, that of course being Leslie Headland, seems to agree with the interviewer who said or asked about how the character of Camille had picked apart who the Jedi are in the show. And this, along with many other things said by Headland lately, that implies she wants to, pick apart the Jedi or kind of tear them down. She has said that this show isn't going to be kind to them, and even says later in this very interview that they act the way they do because they have no oversight, or feel like they can do whatever they want, basically. And so what I want to do in this video is basically argue against her argument, if it can even be called that. I want to pick apart what Camille has said, or look at the few things in the show that this character has said that apparently are strong points made against the Jedi. And honestly, like I was just kind of saying, there hasn't been many of them, so this won't take too long, nor are they made well or even in a compelling way. And before getting started, I do want to acknowledge that yes, in the context of the show, or from Camille's point of view in the show, he can absolutely believe his arguments to be good ones, or that he is justified in his actions. In fact, him believing in these things will indeed make him a better character. I even acknowledged in my review for the 6th episode that I think Camille is attempting to turn Osha in a, well, I don't know about a good or believable way exactly. I think the execution of the show has been extremely poor. But it is sort of being done in a way that would make sense for a Sith. He's trying to get her to question what is actually good and evil so that he can turn her. Not all that unlike how Palpatine, the devil, turned Anakin to the dark side. However, from the outside looking in, and knowing what we know about Star Wars and the Sith and the dark side, or at least what Headland, should know about all of this or understand about Star Wars, but we know those who use the dark side are, well, they become consumed by it and will become something akin to Palpatine. They will become the epitome of selfishness and evil. This is how it works in Star Wars according to Lucas. Balance is not using both sides, it is acknowledging the existence of both, realizing the temptation of the dark side, that it will always be there, and then resisting it. So basically what I'm saying here is that Headland isn't making the points she, I guess, thinks she's making, or at least the interviewer thinks she's making, and that others think she is. I have seen plenty of people out there in the comments of my video, on X, or in articles. There are so many articles trying to defend the show, it is kind of silly. But anyway, I have seen so many people thinking that, yeah, there is a good argument being made here against the Jedi. But when you really look at it, I don't even know if we should call it an argument, but if we look at it and try to take it seriously, I don't think it is a very good argument at all against the Jedi. In fact, I think she makes some good points for them. And so when we look at the first point she tries to make against them in the show, which mainly happens in the 5th episode when Kamir is battling Sol, and then Sol asks him, "What do you want?" Kamir's answer is to simply say he wants freedom, which sure, everyone wants and deserves to be free. We should all have the right or freedom to choose the life we want or to pursue the things we want in life. Within reason, of course, because if we all had the freedom to do literally whatever we wanted, the world would be pure chaos. It would be anarchy. If there were, say, no laws, there would be people who would want to and would do terrible things to other people simply because they had the freedom to do so. And the main reason why we have laws in the first place, what the point behind them is, or why a well-functioning society kind of needs them, is to figure out what to do when, shall we say, freedoms overlap, or when one person's freedom interferes with the freedom of another person. When something you want to do is something I don't want done to me or taken from me, for example. We then have rules or laws in place to figure out how to handle those situations. And those laws are, you could argue, meant to be kind of lines in the sand that we all agree shouldn't be crossed, so that we all have equal freedom and the peace of mind to pursue the life we want. They are rules we agree upon that simply make sense for a functioning society. They basically say that I won't try to kill you or steal from you or do anything along those lines, and in return you won't do the same thing to me. And if you choose to do those things, there will be punishment that the society agrees is befitting the crime. And so the very obvious problem with Kamir saying he wants freedom is that since we know he is being corrupted by the dark side, we know he is a dark side user, and we've even seen him kill people already at this point, but we know or can safely assume he's talking about absolute freedom. He wants to be able to do whatever the hell he wants, what he deems fit, and he doesn't think anyone has the right to tell him otherwise or to stop him. He has no interest in living by any laws, and so when he says that the Jedi are threatening my existence, well, you're damn right they are, and should be. The same way in the real world, the existence of murderers, for example, should be threatened. Not to mention those who use the dark side are inevitably going to become more and more corrupted by it, and tend to want or do worse things as they go. They tend to ultimately think their ways or their will should be imposed upon others, like Palpatine basically did. And so what Kamir is really saying, what he really wants is, again, absolute freedom, and that his freedom is more important than that of anyone else's. The next point he tries to make, and honestly it's really the only other one he's tried to make outside of some variation of the I want freedom and the Jedi deny me that argument, but it's when he's talking to Osha about how the Jedi are not allowed to love deeply. Or that the people she loves, that Osha loves, like Sol, who she loves like a father, that he cannot love her back the same way because a Jedi is not allowed to love like that. And first of all here, despite the very common misconception that Jedi are not allowed to love at all, or that they somehow suppress all of their emotions, that isn't true at all. None of that is true. Jedi are allowed to love. I've talked about this many times before, so all I will do this time is just recommend anyone who doesn't believe or understand this just go and listen to Anakin in Episode 2 in Attack of the Clones, when he tells Padme about compassion, about how love is basically the very foundation of everything the Jedi believe, and that they are even encouraged to love. That said, no, Jedi do not allow themselves possessive love. They don't allow themselves to become so attached to one individual or many individuals that they will put that person or persons above everyone and anyone else in the galaxy. The way Anakin put Padme above everyone else and ended up kind of siding with the Sith and condemning everyone else in the galaxy because of it. Now, that doesn't mean they're opposed to others feeling that way or having possessive love or attachment. They're all for it. In fact, they exist so that they can keep the freedom for people to do those sorts of things. They are willing to give up their lives for the freedom of others, essentially. The no attachment rule is just something they live by in order to make sure they're always serving the greater good, always securing the freedoms of others. And if a Jedi doesn't want to live that way, they are free to leave the Jedi Order. In fact, Osha even claims she was the one who decided to leave the Order because, well, she wasn't allowed to love the way she wanted to, apparently. And she was allowed to go out and pursue whatever kind of life she wanted after that. The Jedi didn't secretly kill her or anything like that. They just let her go. They let her live the life she wanted. She is 100% free to pursue whatever type of relationships she wants now. However, Sol and Jeki, who Kamir suggests Osha might be loving or something along those lines in the episode, but they are also free to leave the Jedi Order if they wanted to, or free to stay in it and continue to follow the rules of the Jedi Order. And even if they weren't Jedi, they would of course still be free to choose to love Osha back or not in the same capacity she loves them. Osha is not entitled to their love. I mean, welcome to the real world, Osha, where at some point pretty much all of us who are watching this video now have probably fallen for someone who didn't feel the same way about them. That is life and love. And so though, again, yes, you can argue that it makes sense that Kamir would use this tactic, that he would use a tactic like this against someone who was kind of forced to leave the Jedi Order, it sounds like, because of her attachments to others. But even though it makes sense to use it against Osha, you could say, that doesn't mean it's a good point against the Jedi Order. It is not picking them apart. Again, the Jedi are encouraged to love, and if they want to leave the Order to pursue an attachment-style relationship with somebody else, they are 100% free to do so. They choose to remain a Jedi. That is the key that I think a lot of people overlook. Nothing forces them to stay one. They choose to live this way and to serve a greater good, and from that choice comes a great deal of joy because their life has tremendous meaning. And at the risk of sounding a bit like an ass, or maybe a little rude or blunt, I don't know, but I do get that this might be a hard concept for some people to understand, that joy could come from giving and or living a very modest life of servitude. Now, I am not suggesting that is the way we should all live. I'm not suggesting that at all. But there is joy in living a life for a purpose beyond just the self. In fact, we should all try to live a little bit beyond the self. That is the point of the Jedi Order. That is what it is trying to teach us. That there is more to life than just what I want. There is also a whole world of people around us who want things too, and we have to try to live in balance with all of them. And I certainly acknowledge that it is very difficult to remember or even be aware of in the first place in a world that increasingly is telling you to be materialistic, that is increasingly encouraging you to be selfish, where you are constantly told if you do not have this certain thing, you are missing out on life, or if you are not living this way, then you are living wrong and your life has been meaningless. But anyway, before I go on and on about that, or perhaps that is a good video for another time, but I do find it a bit troubling when some people seem rather eager to tear down the Jedi. I always wonder why some people seem so opposed to the idea that there could be a true or genuine good in the world. Is it because when they look at themselves in comparison, when they look at themselves in the mirror, they realize how far from good they actually are? Is it because they don't want to do any type of self-reflection, or because they want to justify their own poor behavior? Is it that they want to tear down good, make a point that nothing can be that good, because they'll feel better about themselves and potentially their deviant behavior or their own failures in life? Is it because they don't understand or want to understand, or even want to reject, that the Jedi represent an ideal worth striving towards? That no, in theory, in the real world, no one or very few of us could ever really be that good. And again, I'm not saying we should all live like Jedi or even try to. But that doesn't mean we can't or shouldn't try to be a bit more like them, perhaps. That doesn't mean we can't try to be more selfless. Just because you can't be perfect at something doesn't mean you can't try to be a bit better at it. And so I think it's kind of ridiculous that Headland and others think she's making a case or good point against the Jedi, that she's picking them apart, when, if anything, she's making a case for them. She is making a case for the reason why we need something like real Star Wars, because so many people seem to grow more and more selfish every single day, which is what real Star Wars warns us not to do, or warns us against, because when we become consumed by greed, we become a cancer upon society. We become a cancer that only takes and consumes and never gives anything back. We become imbalanced, as does the world around us. And apparently it's happening to the point where many people are rejecting the very idea of goodness in order to simply feel better about themselves. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. What do you think about trying to make these arguments against the Jedi and seemingly for the Sith, and in a way that tries to say they make sense for us here in the real world? That this isn't just the Sith being manipulative in story, but that we should take something away from the Lessons of the Sith? And so whatever you think about any of it, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.